The focus on the show today, the 2020 edition of the International Trade Centre's SME Competitiveness Outlook reveals just how profoundly SMEs and global supply chains have been tested by the COVID-19 pandemic and left international trade in turmoil. Now, this disruption is also having a negative knock-on effect on developing countries. The SME Competitiveness Outlook predicts that African exporters are set to lose more than $2.4 billion in global industrial supply chain exports as a result of factory shutdowns in China, the EU and the United States. The bulk of this loss, more than 70%, is caused by the temporary disruption of the supply chain leakages with the EU as well. Now, Nigerian SMEs contribute significantly to the nation's GDP and over 80% of the workforce. Yet, enormous challenges hampering growth exist, and COVID-19 heightens these. How can SMEs identify inherent growth opportunities in the aftermath of the pandemic or even build lasting businesses for generations to come? Well, joining me now via Skype is financial analyst Ayo Bankole Akinjujoye. Good to have you on the Breakfast Show this morning. Now, let's talk about some short-term and medium-term measures in terms of building a sustainable plan for SMEs to manage to thrive within these trying times. Yes, we've seen some interventions from the Central Bank of Nigeria. We see the Bank of Industry also making some moves. But at the end of the day, just like we've seen on the global front, these interventions are not necessarily enough.
Yes, you're very correct. They are not necessary, but even more important note in Africa is that there are lots of reasons why. In absolute terms, the interventions are not enough, and then on the execution terms, how these interventions are executed, there are also challenges along that chain. So, what it means is that by intent, what you have voted for these interventions is already not enough. Then by design, right, how you intend to execute it is already designed, not to succeed because of the dynamics of the SMEs in Africa. You already mentioned that SMEs provide 84%, of our employment, and you would naturally expect that would be the priority of government for any form of policy at all. But you would then notice that by design, a lot of our policies do not factor in the nature or the characteristics or the demographics of our SMEs. Now, let me give you an example. You have just yesterday, the CBN announced that it had disbursed about 300 billion for intervention, for SMEs. But a lot of SMEs are saying that they haven't benefited because in the middle ground, somewhere in the middle chain, right, the funds that you are providing is not getting to the end target. Now, what do I mean by design? Number one, the MSMEs that you have in Nigeria, a large chunk of them, as a matter of fact, 76.3% of them are micro enterprises, right? And out of these micro enterprises, over 96% of them, overwhelming majority of them, are in the informal space. And by design, the types of interventions you are carrying out is meant for those in the formal space. So you are requesting things like registration, you are requesting things like bank accounts, you are requesting things like credit history. All those kind of things are for those in the formal space. So what you can do is to design your intervention programs in such a way that accommodates those who are either in the informal space or brings or stimulates or encourages those in the informal space to come into the formal space, and not to design it to exclude those in the informal space, who are the largest chunk of those in the MSME space, who then contribute majority of your employment.
Ayo Bankole, if I may just button here now, we still have to commend the government for having taken certain initiatives and also looking at the loan repayment scheme and the interest rate and a whole lot more. And according to what we had from the MPC meeting, they said that conversations are still ongoing with government as well and other stakeholders to fine-tune how well they can improve access to funds. But talking about redesigning, re-strategizing in terms of MSMEs, building their own internal cushions If you would advise in a 5-step address to our local and indigenous businesses, how are they supposed to deal with this now if we still have loopholes with interventions from government, then building on your own internal cushions?
Okay, so to be fair to the MS, they've spent many years, building internal cushions amongst themselves through their various cluster groups, right? You see that MSMEs are, the most heavily dependent on cooperative societies, on thrift societies, on credit associations, and all of that, right? And that is how they are able to uh, keep their cash flow going, stimulate growth and all of that. However, what now needs to be done is there needs to be a marriage between the government, the regulators, and these various cluster groups. Government needs to encourage those various cluster groups that the cooperatives have provided themselves to formalize them, empower them, and then use them as channel or funnels for interventions that are getting to the MSMEs. That's on one side. On another side, MSMEs themselves now need to do the hard work of bringing themselves into the formal space, because no matter what, no matter how much you keep yourself in the informal space, you're going to be excluding yourself from a lot of growth opportunities, right? And I always say that one of the ways, number one ways that you can do that is to ensure that you are keeping formal records of your accounting, irrespective
Most definitely, Ayo Bankole Akinjujoye. We have to be intentional about our bookkeeping measures and also redefining how we do business today. Look at the big corporates; they also started as MSMEs.